Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air as she sliced through a loaf of sourdough bread. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting warm, golden hues across the room. The morning had started like any other. Michael had left for work, and Ethan was upstairs, engrossed in his online classes. It was a typical Tuesday in their suburban neighborhood, where the only disruptions usually came from the occasional lawnmower or delivery truck. But today, that sense of calm was about to be shattered. The doorbell rang, a sound that somehow felt unusually sharp and urgent. Sarah wiped her hands on a dish towel and made her way to the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the frosted glass, she could make out the silhouette of a woman. As Sarah opened the door, the woman stepped forward, a strained smile stretching across her face. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with stringy dark hair and hollow eyes that darted around nervously. "Hello, Sarah," the woman said, her voice thin and flat. Sarah blinked, her brow furrowing. "Yes? Can I help you?" The woman's smile wavered. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Something about the woman's eyes stirred a vague memory in Sarah's mind, but she couldn't place it. The woman took a shaky breath, her hands clasped tightly together as though she were trying to keep herself from falling apart. "I'm Rebecca," she said, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. "Rebecca Parker." The name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Rebecca Parker, Ethan's biological mother. 20 years had passed since they last saw her, and in all that time, not once had she attempted to contact them. Rebecca had been 23 years old, addicted to methamphetamine, and facing homelessness when she signed away her parental rights. The last time Sarah had seen her was in a courtroom, her eyes glassy and vacant as she agreed to the adoption in exchange for rehab and a small financial settlement. Now, standing on Sarah's porch, Rebecca looked like a ghost of her former self, thin, gaunt, and jittery. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. What was she doing here? Why now? "Rebecca," Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. "What are you doing here?" Rebecca glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might be watching. "I need to talk to you. About Ethan." Sarah's spine straightened, a surge of protective anger coursing through her. "You have no right to talk about Ethan. You gave up that right 20 years ago." Rebecca's jaw clenched, and for a moment, her eyes flashed with something dark and desperate. "I didn't give him up," she said, her voice rising. "You took him from me. You and your husband. You stole him. You tricked me." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "We didn't steal anyone, Rebecca. You signed the papers. You were in court. You agreed to the adoption voluntarily." Rebecca's hands trembled as she reached into the worn leather purse slung over her shoulder. "I never wanted to sign those papers. I was pressured, manipulated. You think you're so righteous, so perfect, but you're not. You owe me." Before Sarah could respond, Rebecca pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper and thrust it toward her. Sarah's eyes skimmed the document. A hastily scribbled demand for $500,000 in exchange for Rebecca relinquishing any claim to Ethan. Sarah's stomach twisted. This wasn't about love or concern for Ethan. This was blackmail. "You want money?" Sarah said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "After 20 years, you show up and demand $500,000? You think we owe you anything?" Rebecca's face hardened. "You have money. I know you do. That big house, the fancy car. You've had the life that was supposed to be mine. I carried that boy for 9 months, and you think you could just take him away and live happily ever after? Well, I want what's mine. Either you give me the money, or I'm going to the court. I'll tell them I was coerced. I'll tell them I was forced to sign those papers." Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. Rebecca's eyes were wild now, her pupils dilated and unfocused. Was she on drugs again? Or was this just desperation? Either way, she was clearly unhinged. "You signed away your parental rights," Sarah said, her voice calm but steely. "There's no going back. You don't get to come here and threaten me. You don't get to barge into Ethan's life after 20 years and demand anything. And if you think you can intimidate me, you're wrong." Rebecca's jaw tightened, and she took a step closer, her breath reeking of stale cigarettes. "I know things about Ethan, things he needs to know. If you don't pay me, I'll tell him the truth. You can't keep me away from my son. He's not your son, Sarah snapped, her heart pounding. Not anymore. Rebecca's face twisted into a cruel smirk. We'll see about that. You have a week. If I don't get the money, I'm going to tell Ethan everything. And trust me, he'll hate you for keeping me away from him all these years. With that, Rebecca turned on her heel and stormed down the porch steps, her boots crunching against the gravel. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her chest heaving, her mind racing. How could this be happening? How could someone like Rebecca, who had abandoned her son without a second thought, dare to come back and demand money? Closing the door, Sarah leaned her forehead against the cool wood, trying to steady her breathing. Images of Ethan as a baby flashed through her mind, his tiny hands grasping her finger, his first steps, his first words. She had been there for all of it. Not Rebecca. The sound of footsteps behind her made her jump. Ethan stood at the base of the stairs, his brow furrowed. Mom? Who was that? Sarah swallowed, forcing herself to smile. Just a salesperson, she said quickly. Nothing important. But as she watched Ethan disappear back upstairs, her heart sank. She knew Rebecca wasn't going to go away. Not without a fight. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was afraid. Afraid that Rebecca might actually find a way to tear their family apart. The coffee pot beeped, signaling the end of its brew cycle. But Sarah couldn't move. She felt trapped, as though Rebecca's shadow had seeped into every corner of their home. And as she stood there, staring at the closed door, one thought echoed through her mind. How far was Rebecca willing to go to get what she wanted? And how far would Sarah have to go to protect her son? That night, Sarah lay awake in bed, her mind churning with thoughts of Rebecca's sudden appearance. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rebecca's wild, unhinged gaze, the way her hands shook as she demanded money, the desperation etched into her face. Beside her, Michael was snoring softly, oblivious to the storm raging in her mind. Sarah had said nothing to him yet. How could she explain that Ethan's biological mother, a woman they had tried so hard to forget, was back and demanding $500,000? When morning finally broke, Sarah felt as though she hadn't slept at all. She moved through the house like a ghost, her mind distant and foggy as she prepared breakfast. Ethan came down the stairs, still in his pajamas, his hair tousled from sleep. "Morning, Mom," he said, reaching for a bowl of cereal. "Are you okay? You look tired." Sarah forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well, that's all. Late-night emails from work." Ethan nodded, his attention already drifting to his phone as he scrolled through his social media feed. Sarah watched him, her heart aching. How could she tell him the truth? How could she explain that the woman who had abandoned him as a newborn was back and threatening to tear their family apart? After Ethan left for class, Sarah made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she opened her laptop. She needed to find the adoption paperwork. She needed to see the documents for herself, the ones Rebecca claimed she had been forced to sign. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her stomach twisting into knots. She knew that somewhere in the attic, buried beneath years of old photo albums and baby clothes, were the files that held the key to Ethan's adoption. Taking a deep breath, she closed the laptop and headed upstairs. The attic was cold and musty, the air thick with the scent of old cardboard and forgotten memories. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, each one labeled with a black marker in Michael's neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, baby clothes, old photos. Finally, she found it, a heavy, dust-covered box labeled legal documents. Sarah pulled it down and set it on the floor, her hands shaking as she peeled back the lid. Inside, she found folders filled with old tax returns, medical records, and finally, a thick stack of adoption papers. She sifted through them, her eyes scanning each page, her heart pounding as she found the documents that mattered, the ones Rebecca had signed in court 20 years ago. The ink was faded, but the signatures were clear. Rebecca's name scrawled in shaky letters next to the date, August 12, 2005. But there was more. Beneath the adoption papers, Sarah found a letter she had never seen before. It was dated a week after the adoption was finalized, and it was addressed to the attorney who had handled the case. The letter was handwritten, the ink smudged in places as though the writer had been crying while writing it. Dear Mr. Callahan, I don't know what to do. I feel like I was tricked. They said it was the only way, that if I didn't sign, they would take Ethan away anyway. I was scared, and I wasn't thinking straight. Now I can't stop crying. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I need my baby back. Please tell me there's a way to undo this. Rebecca Parker. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Rebecca had tried to undo the adoption. Why hadn't the lawyer told them about this? Had he kept it hidden? Or had he deemed it irrelevant since Rebecca never pursued it further? Before Sarah could process the implications, her phone buzzed on the floor beside her. It was a text from Ethan. Mom, do you know a woman named Rebecca Parker? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her fingers trembled as she typed a reply. Why? A few seconds later, Ethan's response appeared. She messaged me on Instagram. She says she's my biological mom. Sarah's blood ran cold. Rebecca had reached out to Ethan. How had she found him? Had she been stalking him online all these years, watching his life unfold through the filtered lens of social media? The thought made Sarah feel sick. Downstairs, the front door opened, and Michael's voice echoed through the house. Sarah, you home? Sarah stuffed the papers back into the box and shoved it aside, her mind racing. She needed to talk to Michael before Ethan came home. Michael was in the kitchen, setting down a grocery bag when Sarah entered the room. He took one look at her and frowned. You look like you've seen a ghost. Rebecca was here yesterday, Sarah said, her voice flat. Michael's jaw clenched. Rebecca? As in, Ethan's mother? Yes. And she wants money. $500,000. Michael's eyes widened, a vein throbbing in his temple. You're kidding me. After all these years? Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. She said we stole Ethan from her, that we tricked her into signing the adoption papers. But it's not just that. She messaged Ethan on Instagram. She told him she's his mother. Michael ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. Did Ethan respond? I don't know, Sarah said, her voice breaking. But I found a letter in the adoption files. It was addressed to our lawyer. Rebecca wrote it a week after the adoption, saying she felt pressure to sign. She said she wanted Ethan back. Michael's face darkened. So what? She regrets her decision. And now she thinks she can just waltz back in and demand money? What does she expect us to do? Hand over a check and pretend the last 20 years never happened? Sarah shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know. But if she's reaching out to Ethan, we need to do something. We need to protect him. Michael nodded, his expression hardening. We need to talk to a lawyer. Find out exactly what our rights are. And we need to talk to Ethan before Rebecca twists the story and makes us look like the villains. That evening, Sarah and Michael sat Ethan down in the living room, their hearts heavy with dread. Ethan's face was a mask of confusion as he listened to them explain Rebecca's sudden reappearance. I didn't respond to her message, Ethan said, his jaw clenched. But why now? Why after all these years? She wants money, Michael said bluntly. She thinks we owe her something. But she gave me up, Ethan said, his eyes flashing with anger. She chose to leave me. Why does he get to come back now and demand anything? Sarah reached for Ethan's hand, her heart breaking at the hurt in his eyes. We're going to handle this, okay? We're talking to a lawyer. Rebecca has no legal claim over you. You're our son. You always have been. And nothing she says can change that. Ethan nodded, but his jaw remained tight, his fists clenched at his sides. Sarah watched as he stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the darkening night. She said she wants to tell me the truth, Ethan said, his voice low. She said you lied to me. Michael stiffened. What truth? Ethan shook his head, his shoulders tense. I don't know, but I want to find out. Sarah's heart sank. This was what she had feared, that Rebecca's sudden reappearance would plant a seed of doubt in Ethan's mind, a seed that could grow into a chasm between them. She had to act quickly. They had to get to the bottom of Rebecca's story before she could poison Ethan's mind with lies. But as she stood there, watching Ethan's rigid posture, a sinking feeling settled in her gut. Rebecca wasn't going to stop, not until she got what she wanted. And if Sarah couldn't find a way to shut her down, she was terrified that she might lose the son she had spent 20 years raising and loving as her own. The air in the house felt heavier after that night. Ethan was quieter, more distant. He spent more time in his room, headphones clamped over his ears, his gaze fixed on his laptop screen. Sarah could feel the tension radiating off him like a palpable wave, and it tore at her heart. Every time she tried to approach him, to ask how he was feeling or if he wanted to talk, he would shake his head and mutter, "I'm fine," before retreating further into himself. Michael, on the other hand, had become restless and irritable. He paced the living room, his fists clenched, jaw tight. Every few minutes, he would glance at his phone as if waiting for a call that never came. They had already contacted their lawyer, Brian Wells, who had promised to look into Rebecca's claim and determine whether she had any legal grounds to reopen the adoption case. But it had only been a day since that call, and each passing hour felt like a lifetime. Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee as she stared at the letter she had found in the attic. The words swam before her eyes. Rebecca's desperate plea to the lawyer, the ink smudged in places as though she had been crying while writing it. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this, something that didn't add up. Why had Rebecca waited 20 years to come forward? And why had she suddenly claimed that she was coerced into the adoption? If she had been so desperate to keep Ethan, why hadn't she fought harder back then? Or had she? Before she could dwell on it any further, her phone buzzed on the countertop. It was Brian. Sarah snatched up the phone, pressing it to her ear. "Brian?" "Sarah, I've got some news," he said, his voice serious. I looked into Rebecca Parker's background. She's in deep financial trouble. Multiple debts, a failed business, eviction notices. It's bad. She's drowning, Sarah. That's why she's coming after you now. She's desperate for money. Sarah closed her eyes, a wave of nausea rolling through her. That doesn't surprise me. But can she actually do anything? Can she take Ethan away from us? Legally? No, Brian said. The adoption was finalized. You have all the documents, including the court order. But here's the thing. If she can convince a judge that she was coerced or manipulated into signing those papers, she might get a hearing. And if she can convince Ethan to take her side, it could get complicated. Sarah's heart sank. Ethan, he's confused, Brian. She's been messaging him, telling him that we lied to him. He's starting to doubt us. What if she gets to him? What if she convinces him to take her side? That's why you need to shut this down fast, Brian said. I'm going to send a cease and desist letter to Rebecca, warning her that any further contact with Ethan will be considered harassment. And there's one more thing we can do, a DNA test. A DNA test? Sarah frowned. What would that prove? Think about it, Brian said. Rebecca is claiming that she was coerced, that the adoption was fraudulent. If we can prove that she isn't even Ethan's biological mother, her entire argument falls apart. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. What do you mean, not his mother? She gave birth to him. I was there. I held him in my arms the day he was born. Yes, but have you ever actually seen the birth certificate? Brian asked. I'm not saying she isn't his mother, but given how desperate she is for money, it wouldn't hurt to be absolutely sure. And if the test comes back showing that she's not his mother, then we can discredit her entirely. Sarah's mind was spinning. Was it possible? Could Rebecca have been lying all along? Could she have been posing as Ethan's mother to extort money from him? I'll do it, Sarah said, her voice firm. I'll talk to Ethan and convince him to take the test. After hanging up with Brian, Sarah went to find Ethan. She found him in his room, slumped on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. His headphones were around his neck, the music still playing softly. When he saw her, he sat up, his expression guarded. Hey, she said, sitting down beside him. Can we talk? Ethan shrugged. What about? About Rebecca, Sarah said gently. I know you're confused right now, and I don't blame you. This is a lot to deal with. But your father and I just want to protect you. We want to make sure that Rebecca isn't lying to you. Ethan's jaw tightened. Lying? About what? She said you guys stole me from her. That you pressured her to sign the adoption papers. Is that true? Sarah's chest tightened. No, Ethan. It's not true. We followed every legal step. Rebecca signed away her rights voluntarily. But there's something we need to be sure of. We need to do a DNA test. Ethan's eyes widened. A DNA test? Why? To confirm that Rebecca is really your biological mother, Sarah said. If she's lying about that, then we can prove that she's just trying to manipulate you. And if she is your mother, then we'll deal with it. but we need to be absolutely certain. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark and stormy. Then he nodded. Fine, let's do it. The next day, Sarah and Ethan went to a DNA testing facility. The process was quick, a simple cheek swab, a few signatures, and a promise to call with the results within a week. As they left the clinic, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. What if Rebecca really was Ethan's mother? What if the test came back confirming her claim? Would Ethan resent them for keeping her away? A week later, the results arrived in a plain white envelope. Sarah's hands shook as she tore it open, her eyes scanning the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. And there it was, the confirmation she had both dreaded and hoped for. Rebecca Parker was not Ethan's biological mother. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Not his mother. Not his mother. The words echoed in her mind, a dizzying whirl of disbelief and relief. But if Rebecca wasn't his mother, then who was? And why'd she claim to be? Before Sarah could process the implications, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. Mom, Rebecca just called me. She's outside the house. She says she has proof that you lied about everything. Sarah's blood ran cold. The DNA test results were still clenched in her fist as she rushed to the door. Outside, Rebecca stood on the porch, her hair disheveled, her eyes wild. In her hand, she clutched a stack of papers, waving them frantically as Ethan stood behind her, his face pale and stricken. You lied to him, Rebecca screamed, her voice raw and shrill. You stole him from me. You stole my son. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding. The DNA test crumpled in her hand. You're not his mother, Rebecca, she said, her voice calm but firm. You never were. Rebecca's face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing as she advanced towards Sarah. I am his mother. You're lying. You're trying to turn him against me. Ethan's eyes darted back and forth between them, his expression one of utter confusion. What's going on? What's the truth? Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving Rebecca's. The truth is right here, she said, holding up the DNA test results. Rebecca isn't your mother. She never was. And now it's time for her to tell you the truth about who you really are. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she looked as though she might collapse. The papers in her hand slipped to the ground, scattering across the porch like fallen leaves. And as the wind carried them away, Sarah knew that the lies Rebecca had spun were about to unravel, and that the truth was far more twisted than any of them could have imagined. The wind howled through the trees, sending a flurry of leaves skittering across the driveway. Rebecca stood frozen on the porch, her shoulders hunched, eyes wild with desperation. The crumpled DNA test results were still clenched in Sarah's fist, the words not a match glaring up at her like a silent accusation. Ethan's eyes darted between the two women, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle ticked in his cheek. Someone needs to start talking, he said, his voice strained. What the hell is going on? Rebecca's face twisted, her lips quivering as she reached for Ethan's hand. Ethan, sweetheart, don't listen to her. She's trying to confuse you. I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. I know it. I feel in my bones. Sarah stepped forward, holding up the DNA test results. You're not his mother, Rebecca. The test proves it. You've been lying to him, lying to all of us. Why? What are you trying to gain? Rebecca's eyes flashed, and she snatched the papers from Sarah's hand, her nails digging into the crumpled sheets. She scanned the results, her eyes widening as the truth finally sank in. The test was conclusive. There was no biological connection between her and Ethan. Her knees buckled, and she slumped onto the porch steps, the papers fluttering to the ground like dead leaves. I didn't know, Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. I thought he was mine. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. You thought? You told me you were my mother. You said they stole me from you. You lied to me. Rebecca's gaze darted to Ethan, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I swear I didn't know. I really thought you were mine. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. How could you think that? You signed away your rights. You knew Ethan wasn't your child. So why come back now? Why demand money? Rebecca's shoulders sagged, and she buried her face in her hands. I was desperate. I lost everything, my job, my apartment, everything. And then I found a box of old photos of my sister's things after she died. There were pictures of a baby boy, your baby boy, and I convinced myself he was mine, that they had taken him from me when I was too high to remember. I convinced myself I was his mother because if I wasn't, then who the hell was I? The air hung heavy with Rebecca's confession, the truth like a bitter pill that no one could swallow. Ethan turned away, his shoulders rigid, his face a mask of rage and betrayal. "But you told me you were my mother," Ethan said, his voice a deadly whisper. "You said they lied to me. You tried to turn me against them." Rebecca sobbed, her hands trembling as she clutched the porch steps. "I was wrong, Ethan. I was so wrong. I wanted to believe it so badly. I needed to believe it. Because if you weren't mine, then what?" Ethan snapped, his eyes blazing. "Then you be just some random woman trying to extort money from my parents? Is that it?" Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes red and swollen. "No, I swear, I thought you were mine. I really did. And when I found out how much money they had, how much money they made, I thought maybe I could get some of it back. To start over. To fix my life." Sarah's jaw clenched, her nails biting into her palms. "So, you thought you could blackmail us with a lie? You thought you could tear our family apart just to get some cash?" Rebecca lowered her head, her shoulders shaking. "I was desperate, and I was wrong. I see that now. I am sorry. I'm so sorry." But the apology was empty. The damage was done. Ethan's face was a mask of cold fury as he stepped back, his gaze never leaving Rebecca's crumpled form. "You're not my mother," he said, his voice flat and lifeless. "You never were. You're just some woman who tried to use me to get what she wanted. You disgust me." Rebecca let out a wail, her body collapsing onto the steps. "Please, Ethan. Please, I just wanted to belong to someone. I have no one left. My sister is dead. My mother is dead. You were my last chance." Ethan turned away, his fists clenched, his shoulders tense. "You're not my problem." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her eyes soft but firm. "Come on, Ethan. Let's go inside. Let's leave her to the mess she created." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight as they walked back into the house. Michael was standing in the living room, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's over," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "She's not his mother. She never was." Michael's eyes softened as he reached for Ethan, pulling him into a tight embrace. "We're here for you, buddy. We always have been. Always will be." Ethan hugged his father back, his body shaking with silent sobs. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt the tension in her chest loosen. Rebecca was not Ethan's mother. The DNA test had proven that. But there was still one more question that lingered, one more mystery left to unravel. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Ethan was asleep, Sarah sat alone in the living room, the DNA test results clutched in her hand. Her eyes scanned the paper, her mind replaying Rebecca's words over and over. A box of old photos and her sister's things. Could it be possible that Rebecca's sister was Ethan's real mother? Had she been the one to give birth to him? Only for Rebecca to take her place in a twisted bid for control and money? Sarah picked up her phone and dialed Brian's number. When he answered, his voice groggy with sleep, she didn't hesitate. "Brian, I need you to look into something for me. I need you to find out who Rebecca's sister was, and if she had a baby around the time Ethan was born." The next day, Brian called back. "I found her," he said, his voice grim. "Her name was Linda Parker. She had a baby boy in 2005, but she died in a car accident a month later. The baby was put up for adoption through a private agency. Sarah, I think Ethan is Linda's son. Rebecca was never his mother. She was his aunt." The truth hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Rebecca had known all along. She had known that Ethan wasn't her son, but had still tried to claim him to get money. The cruelty of it was staggering. Brian continued, "I filed a restraining order against Rebecca. She's to have no further contact with Ethan or your family. If she tries to reach out, she'll be arrested for harassment and attempted extortion." Sarah exhaled, the weight of the past few days lifting from her shoulders. It was over. Rebecca was gone. The truth was out, and Ethan was safe. That evening, as the family sat down to dinner, Sarah looked around the table, at Michael's tired but relieved smile, at Ethan's still wounded but healing expression. They had weathered the storm, but the scars would take time to fade. Ethan set down his fork, his gaze meeting Sarah's. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice raw but sincere, "for always telling me the truth, for never giving up on me." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she reached for his hand. "You're my son, Ethan, and nothing, no lie, no woman, no DNA test will ever change that." And as they sat together, the warmth of their bond filling the room like a light, Sarah knew that the worst was behind them. Rebecca's lies had been exposed. The truth had finally come out, and their family, shaken but still standing, was stronger than ever.